Evening, fellas. Happy to see everybody for another episode of the Blind Pig, courtesy of BGObsession.com, where we're going to kind of break down some assistant coaches and dig a little deeper into the new coaching staff under Dan Quinn. But before we do that, quick intros. Top left is Chris. You can catch him as Chris. Bottom left is John. He hails as Boone. Bottom right is Bob. You can find him as Neophyte. My name's Derek. You can catch me at Silent Threat. So please get on over to BGObsession.com. Join, mix it up, post as we enjoy good conversation. So, fellas, first, before we kick things off, a little thoughts and prayers going out to the big one, Mike Sellers. Apparently, he's in the hospital dealing with heart issues. He's had 9 procedures in the last 5 years, I think I saw. Trying to work on a heart disease that he has that apparently is genetic. I don't know the details totally. But it's literally to the point where there's a GoFundMe page trying to get some financial assistance from his family to help pay for his hospital bills, which is kind of depressing to think about.
Eye-opening, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
considering
you would hope the NFL, if they haven't already, that they're going to see that and they're going to make a big donation. I mean, NFL could like blink their eyes and make all the
$1 million. Like, here, just your bills are gone. So
Joe Gibbs donated $10,000 today.
Well, that was cool. But thoughts and prayers to Big Mike. Big Mike was always one of my favorite players to watch.
The caveman, right?
One of my favorite plays that I'll ever remember was I believe we were playing the Cardinals, and he was out on a pull in front of Clinton Portis, and Clinton Portis reached out to try to kind of guide him and started stumbling, so he just held on to Sellers' jersey, and it literally just rode him for about 7 yards into the end zone. It was one of my favorite plays to ever witness. So, Big Mike, we're thinking about you.
Nice.
Anyways, if nobody else has anything to say about that, on to coaches. There's been a lot about our new assistant coaches coming in. I believe I heard a stat today, 21 new coaches were hired, and 3 were retained, if I'm not mistaken.
4 were retained.
Who are those? So Pritchard's one.
Pritchard, Kerrigan, and Bobby Ingram, the wide receiver coach.
There's one of the offensive quality control coaches was also, hang on, I've got it. Oh, give me 1 second. I wasn't prepared for that, Derek.
I like to mess you up with pop quizzes.
I think the Pritchard one is really good. I just think that's a good thing, to have that consistency there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I was listening to the radio today, and they actually they interviewed him, and then they were talking to Ben Standig. Grant and Andy were talking to Ben Standig, and they said they interviewed him and they were impressed. What did he think? And he's like, well, he's a former quarterback that went to Stanford, so I mean, he's obviously, he's got a lot of above the shoulders, and he understands, So I agree. I think that's big. Who?
Shane Tube was an offensive quality control coach under Rivera, who was also retained.
Okay, so 4 coaches retained of the however many.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy how much changed it. I don't know if you guys have this reaction, but I'm just like, I'm just so pumped up to have like all this infusion of. It doesn't even matter who they are to an extent, right? It's like they're just different guys who don't.
And the process is different. Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's going to be successful, but it's exciting as hell. I don't know if you guys.
Well, and it's non-nepotistic, I guess, if you want to call it that. We're not talking about Carolina North again. We're not talking about a bunch of coaches that had no other choice. So they were, we were the 32nd team that had a running backs coach position available. So somebody took it because they just wanted to make sure they stayed in the league and relevant. I mean, there are some big name people that are seeking out these positions, which is just exciting.
Yep. Well, let's dive in, man. Let's start talking.
Man. I think we had originally talked. What we'll just do is go down your list here as I'm trying to pull it up now that I've lost it. But if I remember their list correctly, Izzo was the first one in the tee box. So I'm gonna throw it to you, Chris, and away we go.
Yeah, Larry Izzo is actually the only coordinator that we haven't previously discussed, special teams coordinator. He's 49 years old, born in Fort Belvoir, Virginia,
Ooh.
and played 2 years of high school football at Broad Run in Ashburn. So he should know the area a little bit. Moved to Texas and then went to Rice, played college linebacker at Rice. He was an undrafted rookie into the NFL. Miami signed him as a UDFA, and he played 200 games. Not bad. 4-time Super Bowl champion, 3 as a player, 1 as a coach. He was on the all-rookie team in 1996. He was a 3-time Pro Bowler, and 1 time he was a first-team All-Pro. He was a player. He started coaching in 2011 and spent 4 years as the assistant special teams coach at the New York Giants. He also interviewed for the Giants special teams coach this year, but came here instead. He moved from the Giants 2016 and 2017. He was the special teams coordinator in Houston. He moved to Seattle for 2 years as the assistant special teams coach. And then from 2020 to 2023, he was the special teams coordinator in Seattle. During those 3 seasons, according to Football Outsiders DVOA metrics, Seattle ranked number 5 in special teams in 2021, number 4 in 2022, and number 8 in 2023. So he has a track record. He was fired, I assume, by Mike McDonald. He left Seattle so that they could hire John Harbaugh's son, Jay. Speaking of a little nepotism. Interesting anecdote. Early on in his career with the Dolphins, in his first or second year, he actually was able to defecate on the sidelines during a game without anybody being aware of it.
A dream all of us have had.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
I mean, maybe it's pre-heyday of cell phones if there weren't people filming it.
There weren't enough
That's Chris,
cameras.
that's actually where that was the original driving event for the phrase when the shit hits the fan. I don't know if you know that, but anyway.
But more funny than that was that after the game, his coach Jimmy Johnson awarded him a game ball for having been able to carry that out without being found out.
In the Marine Corps, we say good initiative, bad judgment.
Now they have a blue medical tent anyway. So.
That might be the reason we have a blue medical tent now.
Yeah, we just think guys are going in there to get their head checked out.
Right. Yeah, I'm excited about Izzo because his Seattle special teams have been super solid. And that's probably one of those, like you said, we just got lucky because the new coach wanted his own guys and we benefited from that. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess we are going to bounce around a little bit, but the next one coming up, beyond Izzo, is Brian Johnson, who was mine, the assistant head coach, passing game coordinator. So a little bit into his history. Brian Johnson was actually a quarterback at Utah, of all places, and as a true freshman, he backed up Alex Smith. In 2005, as a starter, he suffered a season-ending knee injury, where he redshirted a season. In 2007, he went on to become the Poinsettia Bowl MVP, which isn't huge. But then the following year in 2008, he led Utah to a number 7th in the country, ranked number 7th in the country, 6th in the BCS poll, and they beat Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, and he won MVP. And for his troubles, he was the cover athlete for NCAA 2010, the video game. So,
So we have a legit rock star on the team.
It is a rock star. He's so Tina. Sorry, freaking dull. As a coach, hang on a second. As a coach in the NFL, first he started off as a quarterbacks coach at Utah on 2010 at 22 years of age. He bounced around in the NFL a little bit, but I don't think he actually latched on. I don't even think actually logged an official snap. Mississippi State 2014, he went on to become a quarterbacks coach. Then he went to Houston 2016 as the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. 2017, he went on to Florida where he was a quarterbacks coach. Before in 2021, he got a shot with the Eagles where he just led them as their quarterbacks coach and wide receiver coach under Nick Sirianni, where then he got promoted to O coordinator in 23. So in 21 and 22, arguably the class of our division after Jalen Hurts got hired or got drafted, went on into 23 as the offensive coordinator, led them to a 10-1 start, had Jalen Hurts on the way to an MVP conversation before nagging injuries. Just a little of note with his offense, AJ Brown had over 1,000 yards in 9 games, including 6 consecutive games of 125 yards or more. So after the 10-1 start, the Eagles kind of fell apart. We all kind of know the deal there. After the season, it was deemed he would not be retained. What research I have done out there isn't too extensive, but what I have found out about him, a lot of people believe he was made the scapegoat that kind of kept Nick Sirianni employed to explain the downfall of the team. I don't know that Sirianni was ever going to get fired, but a lot of people say that they put a lot of it on Brian Johnson and it wasn't necessarily his fault. I'm actually really intrigued about him as an offensive pass game coordinator because of what he was able to do with guys like AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. Obviously, he's got it. AJ Brown's a premier guy in the league. I would argue he's top 5, top 6 receiver. Devontae Smith isn't that high, but Jalen Hurts also isn't exactly he wasn't exactly known for his passing ability, and that pass game was still very potent at times. So I'm kind of intrigued about Brian Johnson because he was also in camps about being considered for a head coaching candidate. And people were saying he was on a fast track to be a head coaching candidate, especially through the first 2/3 of the season this year. And it kind of came apart. So I think we kind of got a steal there. And not only is he given offensive pass game coordinator, he's given an assistant head coach title. So, which means the only way that he can get hired away from us or break of contract is to become a head coach. I don't believe he can then leave to be a coordinator. So he is ours until somebody wants to make him their head coach.
Oh.
Next up, Bobby Johnson.
So Bobby Johnson, our new O-line coach, he's probably the only coaching hire that I've heard a lot of people squawking about on the interwebs. And I think that's almost entirely because he came from the Giants, who had like historically bad offensive line the last 2 seasons. I think they had 134 sacks over the last 2 years and broke or this year they had over 80. I've got it here, but anyway, 85, which is the second largest total in NFL history. I'm assuming that David Carr year is the first, but anyway, I don't know how fair that is, and I pointed out on the board it may be totally fair. So don't get me wrong. We're about to find out. But I did make the point, on the board a little snarkily that a lot of guys wanted Wink Martindale to come here and be our DC when he got canned. But his defense was god awful in 2023. I mean, the Giants were horrific. So I don't think that makes Wink Martindale a bad coach. I think he's a very good coach. So you just always have to look at it in the context of the personnel, injuries, even the other coaches. But just to give you a quick rundown on Bobby Johnson, he spent a long time as a college coach from like 95 to 2009, coached offense and defense at Akron, Miami of Ohio, which I believe is his alma mater, and Indiana. He came to the NFL in 2010. And not only he actually spent a number of years as a tight ends coach, and they kind of moved into the offensive line, system offensive line, and offensive line positions in the more recent years. But I wanted to point out one thing: he was with the Lions as their tight end coach in 2013 and 2014, and guess who their GM was during that stretch? It was Martin Mayhew.
Mm-hmm.
So that may be one of the factors, whether that's good, you think that's good or bad, but Mayhew certainly knows the guy pretty well. Anyway, he bounced around from team to team as an O-line coach. And then I think that if you're going to be a pro Bobby Johnson guy, you're probably going to point to Buffalo, the job he had at Buffalo right before he came to the Giants for 3 seasons. They were ranked 21st in 2019 when he got there. The offensive line was 10th in 2020, and then they fell back to 17th in 2021. But I mean, pretty solid. And I think not just the ranking, but the line just played well. Of course, a lot of people will say, well, our line would play a lot better or look a lot better if we had Josh Allen under center, right? And there may be some truth to that, but what I never hear people say is, well, Bobby Johnson would look a lot better if he didn't have Daniel Jones and or the 18 guys who replaced him after he got hurt under center. So I love it how people cherry pick those things, depending on whether they want to criticize somebody or.
Yeah, I'm sure Bill Walsh is sorry that Joe Montana was his starting quarterback for a while. I think it.
Right. You can't separate all that stuff. And I know there's a lot of rumors that Daboll and him weren't really meshing, and I'm not sure what's going on with Daboll anyway, but he actually had Johnson got into a run-in with a player last season, got reprimanded by Daboll, and so I think it's just a fresh start for him. But I'm just gonna keep my fingers crossed and think good thoughts. So we'll see. I don't think it's some disastrous. I know there's a Hogs Haven article, no offense to those guys, where they were ripping them pretty harsh, I thought. But we'll see. They could turn out to be exactly right, and then we'll have to say sorry. But that's what I got on Bobby Johnson.
Next on deck, who do we have? Let me pull this back up. Mark had done for David Rye. I thought I saw somebody volunteer to jump at Rye.
Yeah, I got him. And it is Rye, which I didn't realize.
Oh, I ran right past freaking Bob. I'm sorry, Bob.
You want to go,
No,
Bob?
that's okay.
Okay.
Who? Anthony Lynn?
Yeah.
I was
Yeah, we
calling
can do him after the chat in. That's good.
Okay.
All right, sounds good.
I was calling him David Ray until I saw the pronunciation. So David Rye, tight ends coach, 43 years old, played his college ball at Iowa as a quarterback. Now, bear with me. I think there's a tell in his coaching resume. His first coaching job, 2013, Texas Tech, assistant quarterback coach, working under head coach Cliff Kingsbury. And then for the bowl game that year, they added on outside receivers coach for the bowl game. He left after that season and went to Green Bay, spent 2 years as a coaching administrator, stayed with Green Bay in 2016, 1 year as an assistant offensive line coach. The next year, 2017, still with Green Bay, became the offensive perimeter coach. 2018, still with Green Bay, became the wide receivers coach. Catching a pattern here? 2019, 2020, he went to Arizona again. He was reunited with Kingsbury and was their wide receivers coach. He left after 2020 and went to Vanderbilt to be the offensive coordinator and the wide receivers coach. And then last year, he was a senior offensive assistant in Tampa Bay. The thing that kind of jumped out to me is that we have hired him as a tight ends coach. And predominantly, his coaching history is perimeter coach, wide receiver coach, wide receiver coach, wide receiver coach, wide receiver coach. That might be a little tell as to what they intend to do with the tight end position coming up.
Yeah.
Again, 43 years old. Dave
Well,
Littleton.
if he needs any help with the traditional tight end role, he can just ask Bobby Johnson what to do.
He did spend 1 year as an assistant O-line coach, though. So,
That is a trend with all these coaches, that there's not just like diversity in terms of who we brought in, but diversity in the jobs they've done. It's not like sometimes you see a guy that's been the same, like a D-line coach for his entire career. That's all he's ever done, but not so much with this group.
yeah.
All right, Bob, you had Anthony Lynn.
Yeah, so let's talk about the new assistant. No, he's not the assistant head coach. He's the
Run game coordinator.
Run game coordinator and running backs coach. I find that interesting. We'll just start right there, because technically that title is a demotion from who he was at San Francisco. And he wasn't out of contract as far as I know. I haven't, done a great deal of looking, but it feels like we had to go ask permission. And they had to let him go, which means Kyle was willing to part with him. And I find that intriguing. So Anthony Lynn, 55 years old, actually born and raised right here close to me in North Texas. He grew up in McKinney and went to Salina High School. He played his college football at Texas Tech, although pre-Kingsbury, right? He predates Kingsbury at 55. Kingsbury was there a decade later. He was injured his senior year and so went undrafted because of concerns over his knee. He played 6 seasons in the NFL with the Giants, the Broncos, and the 49ers. Half of that time was with the Broncos. And he did spend both Super Bowl seasons as a backup running back to Terrell on Mike Shanahan's teams. He retired in 2000, again, due to injuries, and went straight into coaching with the Broncos. Spent a year with the Broncos. He's been all over the place in the NFL. I mean, he's been with the Broncos, the Jaguars, the Cowboys, the Browns, the Jets, the Bills, the Chargers, the Lions, and the 49ers. Interesting highlights out of this guy's career, right? He's been both an interim head coach and a head coach. He was an interim head coach for 1 or 2 games in the 2016 season when Rex Ryan was fired at Buffalo. After previously becoming the interim offensive coordinator for several games because they fired the offensive coordinator. So he kind of worked his way up in the 2016 season. At the end of the 2016 season, he left Buffalo and was hired as the head coach of the brand new, newly minted Los Angeles Chargers. In fact, the two things happened almost consecutively, either the same day or the day after each other. They announced the move to Los Angeles and the hire of Anthony Lynn. He was the first and still only African-American head coach in the history of the Chargers. He had a 33-31 record as a head coach, so he's above 500, unlike our friend Ron. His best season was 2018. They went 12-4 in the regular season, 1-1 in the playoffs. They beat the Ravens and lost to the eventual Super Bowl champions, the New England Patriots, with one Mr. Tom Brady under center. So I don't think there's a lot of shame there. Then the next year, the wheels fell off, but they also traded Phillip Rivers in the offseason, and he went to Indianapolis. So you go from having Phillip Rivers under center to not having a franchise quarterback, and the wheels kind of come off in a lot of cases, right? They went 5-11. He
Correct me
lasted
if
another.
I'm wrong. Was that Tyrod Taylor gets punctured lung? Am I remembering that correctly?
Maybe, I don't know. I didn't
What-
go digging around in that 5-11 season too much, Derek.
I'm pretty sure that's the year Tyrod Taylor was supposed to play, and like he was supposed to get some shot, and they missed and punctured his
Yeah,
lung,
they
like
did.
pregame before a game, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that may be possible.
Yep.
Interesting highlights. So he had the league's best running game with the Jets from 2009 to 2013. In that time frame, the Jets averaged 137 yards per game. That's the league best, and he was the running back coach the entire time. He was the offensive coordinator in Detroit, Dan Campbell's first year, and he was let go so that they could He has worked under Bill Parcells, Rex Ryan, Mike and Kyle Shanahan, Jack Del Rio, and Romeo Crennel in his coaching career. And notable players that he's coached: Fred Taylor, who led the league while that was his first running back coach job, was Jacksonville back in the early 2000s. He coached Fred Taylor to lead the league in rushing. Then he coached Marion Barber for a year. Then he coached Jamal Lewis with Cleveland for a couple of years. Sean Green at the Jets had his best seasons under Anthony Lynn as the running back coach, DeAndre Swift, and then finally, I think everybody's familiar with Christian McCaffrey. He's been predominantly a running back coach, with the exception of short stints as offensive coordinator here and there, and his 4 years as head coach at the Chargers. But he's carried the assistant head coach title a couple of different places, Buffalo and San Francisco both. So highly thought of by some guys with a lot of experience in Kyle Shanahan and Rex Ryan in those two places. So,
Well, and when he was with the Chargers as a head coach, he had a guy by the name of Austin Eckler.
yes. Yes. So, I mean, the guys had some pretty serious. I'm going to be really interested in seeing what he does with Brian Robinson. I also assume that he will have a fairly significant voice in whether or not we bring back Antonio Gibson. So that should be interesting. And of course, we've got young Mr. Rodriguez that I think we all think is, could be, something pretty good in this league as well. And so I'm kind of looking forward to what a guy with this kind of talent apparently does with the running game, especially since we all seem to feel like maybe the running game didn't get the love under Bieniemy that it probably needed or deserved.
Yeah.
So before we move on, Anthony Lynn was actually on the same they were, I don't know if you all knew this, but they had media day today out in Ashburn up here with all the assistant coaches. So they were kind of doing their rounds. So Anthony Lynn was on with Grant Danny also. And there were two quotes I want to read you guys real quick because I know I'm the only one local, so I don't think you three have heard them yet.
Nope.
The first one, Anthony Lynn, quote, "The best thing coaches can do is get the best players on campus. You get them on campus, then you figure out how to use them. I'm not one of these guys that says, quote, this is my system, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not that cookie cutter. Give me the best players, then I'll figure out how to use them."
Nice.
Gibbsian
almost
jumped out at me like, okay, that is why Christian McCaffrey touches the ball 25 times a game and looks like an elite, but it's not, up the gut, eye formation, hard nose. Because everybody wants to say Anthony Lynn is a old school running whatever, but clearly he molds his offensive decision making to his personnel. Then the other quote is, "When I first got into coaching gig, I got the most out of players out of fear. But over the years, you get a little bit more mature. You realize getting to know the players, being more relatable, goes a long ways with these guys. I can coach them. They give me the permission to coach them. A lot of players really never give you permission to coach them. When they know you and they trust you, you can coach the hell out of them. If they don't know you, then everything you say is an attack. But if they know me, it's a challenge. The first thing you have to do is relate to these guys and get to know them. They don't care what you know until they know that you care."
Yeah.
I was like,
he was also, I'm sorry, Derek.
No, go ahead, Chris.
He was also posed a question by Scott Abramson, asking him what he thought about Brian Robinson. And his answer was interesting because most of the coaches are, when they're asked about any specific player, they're saying, well, we're looking through everything, etc. He said, "I remember scouting Brian when he was coming out of Alabama, and he was clearly the most physical back in the entire draft. And I would normally, under that situation, call him an A back. And I consider a B back to be, the guy with the hands that can, create space and catch the ball out of the backfield, etc. And he goes, but Brian has remarkably good hands, especially for a guy his size. And I don't think he's limited to just being a pounded guy.
I think after
apparently he's a
watching,
fan.
I think after watching San Francisco in the playoffs and reading some stuff about Christian McCaffrey and watching Robinson the second half of this season do some of the things he did, I see a lot of similarities. I'm not saying Robinson is McCaffrey. So for you guys out there listening, they'll go, Bob said. No, Bob did not say. However, we've got the same running back coach that's done amazing things with McCaffrey, who admittedly is an amazing talent, right? Legit first round draft pick. And I don't think anybody can argue about that fact. The only real knock in McCaffrey's pro career has been, staying healthy. And amazingly enough, once he got to San Francisco, he seems to have figured out how to stay healthy. I don't know if that's just the luck of the draw or whether San Francisco's got, some secret sauce in the medical tent that Carolina didn't have. But, I see a lot of similarities, and, I'm guessing that Anthony Lynn is looking at Robinson and going, we can do some of the same things with him that I was doing with Christian McCaffrey in San Francisco, which is a real positive.
To your point, Bob, you also wonder, going to San Francisco, if they looked at it and said, this guy's too valuable to be running him up the A gap. Like, they're getting him in space and allowing him to eat. His touches are a lot less dangerous than they were in Carolina. Granted,
and don't forget, Bob, what I said about Bobby Johnson, that Cliff Kingsbury, when he was asked about kind of why he was the choice, that's what he honed in on was the rushing, blocking schemes that he's been able to show in the past. So I think that may all be part of a plan. I think the run is going to be a lot bigger part of this offense than all the air raid folks.
Mm-hmm.
One last thing, where did I put it? On Anthony Lynn. We talk about the coaching tree that people come from. Anthony Lynn actually has his own coaching tree at this point in time, thanks to having been a head coach in San Diego. We have Anthony Lynn to thank for Nick Sirianni and Sean Steichen.
Good.
All right, so, John, you had David Blau.
Okay.
David Bluff.
David Blau, yeah. So that if nothing else, if you stick with us tonight, you'll get the pronunciations down. But David Blau, I mean, probably you're wondering, why the hell did John want to talk about David Blau? He's never been a coach before. He was on Detroit's practice squad a couple of months ago. But here's the reason. I think that's a Kingsbury pick. That's Kingsbury saying, this is a young guy. He's only 28. I think Chris mentioned already. That is a guy that Kingsbury saw and interacted with, and he said that guy's going to be somebody, and we snatched him. Most of the time, like Kerrigan, when Ryan Kerrigan wanted to get into coaching, I mean, hell, he got a pretty good gig. A lot of times you become like a quality control coach or an intern sometimes before you're even a coach. But they made him the assistant quarterbacks coach, despite no coaching experience that I'm aware of. But anyway, he's a former Purdue quarterback. He's a very good college quarterback. He just didn't really have the goods physically to make it at the NFL level. He was an undrafted free agent by the Browns. And then he went to the Lions and he bounced around, but he ended up in Arizona in 2022. And that's why he's here now, because and I don't know if you remember, at some point Kingsbury was asked about Blau, and he said that he's one of the smartest guys he's ever seen or worked with, and that when Blau was a practice squad quarterback, I think he was probably running the scout team for the Cardinals, that he knew the playbook better after 2 weeks than Kingsbury himself knew it. He said, I'm not exaggerating. He knew every detail of every play. And that just, I think it takes a lot at that level, a practice squad guy impressing a coach enough to trust him with a big gig. So I think that says a lot about it. And I also love the age. I think he's going to be, and he just came out of being on an NFL roster. And so I think he could be a big help. And I don't think either Sam or whoever we draft is going to have a hard time like relating. And we already have a pretty good quarterbacks coach. aside from him. So I thought it was worth mentioning him.
Yep.
He's the only assistant position coach we're talking about tonight, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Which gives you an idea that the regard that we already think about him, or at least the attention he's garnering from fans.
Well, he seems like one of those guys that you look at and say, this guy, if Kingsbury gets promoted and he gets a head coaching job, and Brian Johnson gets a head coaching job,
Right. There may be some succession planning going
and
on.
Anthony Lynn moves on to a bigger role, like he's 27, so this guy could be here 10 years and still only be a 37-year-old offensive coordinator after having been in the system for 10, so that's the kind of that's an awesome move in my opinion.
Maybe we're seeing some tangible evidence of the lessons that Quinn says he learned from Atlanta. When Kyle moved on, and instead of promoting somebody off Kyle's staff to run that thing, he brought somebody in from outside and the whole offense fell apart. My guess is one of those things Quinn's really regretting is not promoting Matt LaFleur. But,
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Oh, all right. So next up, we have, I believe we're going to flip to defense now, and we'll jump to John Pagano, senior defensive assistant.
I wanted Pagano because this whole senior defensive assistant thing, I mean, we're seeing some titles here that we've never really seen before. And it kind of, it almost feels like the last couple of years that, well, I'm thinking the last couple of years of Gibbs too, when they just kept bringing in coaches and manufacturing titles for guys that, I mean, Joe already had an assistant head coach. So when they brought in, who was the offensive coordinator they brought in?
Al Saunders.
Al Saunders. What was he? The associate head coach. Yeah. I mean, they literally just, it's like they cornered the market on every single head coach, non-head coach, head coach title you could have. And
Saunders was the keeper of the 450-page playbook. That's that.
Really. I wonder if Blau memorized that one too.
I don't know.
But so I wanted Pagano. I wanted to because I was going to dig into him anyway. So I thought, this is a great excuse. I wanted him because I'm like, senior defensive assistant. What's this guy going to do? So Pagano comes from a football family, kind of like the Harbaugh brothers, right? His dad was a high school football coach for 35 years. Coached both he and his older brother, Chuck. So if the name sounds familiar, Chuck Pagano has been a longtime coach in the league. His last gig was with the Chicago Bears in 2020 or 2020. Yeah, 2020, when he was the defensive coordinator. So John was an all-state linebacker in Colorado, has a business marketing degree from Colorado Mesa University, where he played linebacker for 4 years. And then he went straight into coaching. He did not play in the NFL. He joined the Mesa coaching staff as a linebacker coach right after graduation. Everything he's done has been on the defensive side of the ball. He has never coached any offensive positions anywhere, which I guess is kind of like Anthony Lynn, who's also never worked on the defensive side of the ball. Everything he's done is offensive. He coached college and high school for 6 years before making the jump to the NFL, and he's been in the NFL pretty much continuously ever since, except for last year. Last year, he worked with Jim Mora at UConn as a special assistant to the head coach. Now, I don't know what that means, but all the press releases were really excited about him coming to UConn for the year, and then he joined our staff. Highlights from his career: he's worked for the Saints, the Colts, the Chargers, the Raiders, the Texans, and the Broncos, although a lot of that time was with the Chargers. He's got like a 12-year run in San Diego under multiple different head coaches that culminated with a couple of years, 2, 3 years, 4 years as the defensive coordinator. And oddly enough, it was Anthony Lynn that decided to let him go. When Anthony Lynn came in to be the head coach in San Diego, he let John go. John interviewed with Jay Gruden to be the defensive coordinator in Washington. That was the year we let Joe Barry go after the vanilla ice cream incident and hired Greg Minuski. Minuski was the linebacker coach at Washington, and he was an internal promotion, but Pagano interviewed with Jay to come to Washington. The year before in San Diego, he'd had the number 8 defense in the league, and Anthony Lynn chose to let him go, and Jay Gruden chose not to hire him. I find that intriguing.
Yeah, the owner, that might have been an ownership thing. Sometimes owners want to make conditional hires. You never know.
True. He's been a DC for 5 seasons, 4 with the Chargers and 1 with the Raiders. Interestingly enough, when he was DC with the Raiders, he replaced Ken Norton Jr., who was the previous defensive coordinator and got fired. They worked together there for at least a year in Oakland at the time, right? So, I'm noticing as we talk about this that there's a lot of interaction. These guys have, whether they've worked on the same staff or not, there's been a lot of touching base in places. And so there's got to be, they've got to know each other fairly well. Highlight players, he coached Sean Phillips and he coached Sean Merriman as the linebacker coach out in San Diego when both of those guys had monster seasons and led the NFL in sacks. He's been primarily a linebacker position coach throughout his career. There's not been a lot of deviation from that other than being a defensive special, a special defensive assistant or whatever, or being a DC. Most of his seasons have been as a linebacker coach, but seems like a very interesting hire. I'm going to be real interested to see. I keep saying interesting. I got to find a new word. I'd be fascinated to watch what his role is during the season. I'm going to be very interested in that, where he's working. It seems like primarily a linebacker guy, but we've got Ken Norton Jr., who's renowned as a linebacker coach. So I'm not sure what Pagano's going to do. I'm interested.
Well, there's a lot of work to do on that side of the ball. So I guess next up, I'm going to jump to you, Chris. You have Tom Donatel.
Tommy, don't call me Tom Donatel. Everything I looked up on him, he's Tommy Donatel. So apparently, and I know when the team hired him, they said Tom Donatel. All right, well, Mr. Donatel, the new defensive backs coach, is 34 years old.
Another youngin.
He played his college ball at Iowa, primarily as a defensive back, as a safety to be more specific, and also on occasion played linebacker. So he may be an early adopter of the Buffalo nickel in persona. Immediately after college, he spent 4 years as a graduate assistant in the college ranks, 2 at the University of South Florida, 2 at UCLA. 2017, he went to work for 4 years with the Seattle Seahawks. The first year, he was a quality control and defensive assistant. The next 3 years, he was the defensive assistant working under the defensive coordinator, who was Ken Norton Jr. So he spent 3 years working under Ken Norton Jr. He left, and after that 2020 season, he went to the Chargers to be an assistant defensive backs coach for 1 year. And then last year, he was the defensive passing game coordinator and secondary coach. He is a coach's son, and he has NFL lineage. His father, Ed Donatel, was an NFL defensive coach for 32 years, mostly as a secondary coach, and also had 4 different stints as a defensive coordinator. And his father was a disciple of Vic Fangio. Tommy Donatel.
Of all of the people we've talked about, as crazy as this sounds, I think he has the most to work with, right? Maybe the running back, maybe Anthony Lynn.
What do you mean most to work with? I think he's got one of the biggest challenges is what I would
but I mean you're talking about Forbes, who's a first round pick. We got Benjamin St. Juste. I don't know, man. I'm just like thinking about how quickly, of all the positions that we're talking about, I think we could see the biggest turnaround in defensive backs simply by coaching.
I don't think that's unfair. I mean, you stop and look, the defensive backfield was not a weakness 2 years ago.
He's also got Forrest. He's got Curl. He's got Quan Martin. He's got, I mean,
Percy
Well, he might
Butler.
have
I
Curl.
think
Percy
Percy Butler's
Butler.
That remains to be seen.
You know, I think the biggest problem this last year was the complexity of Del Rio's scheme and the lack of legitimate coaching at the position. And, you know, you look at 2 years ago when Chris, what's Chris's last name? Who's the guy that left and went to Tennessee?
Harris.
Yeah,
Harris.
Chris Harris. Chris Harris had that unit working really, really well. And I mean, all we ever griped about on defense was the fact that we rushed 4 and we didn't have any linebackers.
And we sat back at 9 yards off the ball.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. And again, that's the coordinator. That's not so much, you know, I mean, the position coach is going to coach you to play the way the coordinator wants to scheme things. So I kind of agree with you, Derek. I think there's some talent there for this guy to work with, and there could, with just some basic coaching, this unit could, I'm not saying we're going to see all pro players all of a sudden spring to life, but with even average defensive back play, everything gets more interesting, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, we've talked about a tight ends coach, and let's be honest, does anybody think we have anything at tight end right now? We talked about an O-line coach, and we've been arguing for the last 3 months that we could see 4 new starters next year. Anthony Lynn, I mean, we kind of know what Robinson is. So of all the people we've talked about, I look at the DB's coach and I say, this guy's got more to work with than the other 4 guys we've talked about.
Maybe. You got a long, I don't want to go too much on this, but we got a gray beard who's been inconsistent, I think.
You mean Fuller?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
he's not even under contract.
I think it's fair to say he's been inconsistent. And then you got a guy that may not even be an NFL player. I mean,
Forbes?
Yep.
Oh, I think he's an NFL.
I'm not saying he isn't, but he hasn't shown 1 ounce that he belongs on the field so far. And some guys just cannot get over that mental hurdle. And we'll see. I'm just saying that I would not. He could be a total bust. He could be like
I would disagree with that, John. I think Forbes has shown enough to prove he's an NFL player. He had 3 games where he got absolutely torched, and that's what all of us remember. And unfortunately, I mean, he got 0 help from the coaching staff.
And then he got benched.
You don't know
what he got benched. But when he came back, he actually played fairly decent ball.
We don't know is the point, and that cannot be argued.
Well, and I also
bad. He looked bad, and he looked bad in a lot more than 3 games.
Well, to be fair, also earlier in the season, we were knocking him because he couldn't hold on to interceptions. Guess what that meant? He was in position to intercept it. He just couldn't hold on to the damn thing.
He's fast, and he's an athlete, but I just don't. I'm not saying he's gonna be a bust. I'm just saying we don't know. So we'll see.
Well, we'll see. John, did you volunteer Norton?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll do this really quickly because Ken Norton, that's a home run hire right there. The guy, first of all, if for anyone that's under the age of 60, you know, his dad was heavyweight champion of the world. And I think that's kind of cool because a lot of times you see sons of, you know, really top level athletes that they just can never come out from under the shadow. But Ken Norton Jr. was a star player at UCLA. And I mean, that was a long time ago. And then he was drafted in the 2nd round, and he was part of those 3 Dallas Super Bowl runs. And so he's got Super Bowl rings, multiple Pro Bowls, played for 13 years. And I don't care who you are, man. You play at that position for 13 years, you're a hell of a player because you take a beating and you got to be good to be at that position.
Yeah, even if you come out early, that means you're playing at 33, 34, 35 years of age.
Then so you think, well, he must not have been a coach for very long. He's been a coach since 2004. So, I mean, he's been in the trenches for a long time. And he's another overqualified coach that we have at a lower level position because he was a DC. I think one of you guys mentioned this, might have been you, Bob. He was Raiders. A DC for both the Raiders with John Pagano. I also noted that. And Jack Del Rio, both with the Raiders.
And I missed that.
and then also with the Seahawks. And of course, he got fired from those jobs, but nevertheless, he was the DC. And with the Seahawks, he worked with Dan Quinn for 3 seasons, so that's an obvious tie-in there. And then he also coached for a stretch at USC, and they were kind of known while he was there. They were kind of known as like the linebacker factory for NFL linebackers. He coached. He kind of groomed Bobby Wagner, Brian Cushing, and a lot of other linebackers. So I think that is a home run hire. And I mean, I think maybe we'll actually consider it an NFL position group now versus never. And I know we've talked about it 100 times, but how in the hell Del Rio and Rivera, 2 former linebackers, could not value the linebacker position more than they did? I'll never understand.
Although we're gonna have to bring in a lot of players. I think if you go look at the roster right now, there's like 2 guys on the roster who are labeled as linebackers.
Yeah.
So
Davis and Barton. That's it.
Khalil
no,
Hudson's
Barton's
listed.
a free agent.
Oh, I thought he signed a 2-year
Now,
deal.
Barton, not to get into free agency, but Barton is one of those guys that I could see someone like Ken Norton coming in and saying, re-sign him. I'll get him up to speed. I could
Well,
see
he
that.
played for
He
Norton.
played for Norton in Seattle.
Yeah, he played for Norton and no, Pagano wasn't in Seattle. Donatel was in Seattle at that point in time, I guess. So I mean, Barton's got history with some of the new coaches here. Well, and Quinn, would he? No, Quinn was
How-
gone.
Barton's
Because
not.
Quinn went to Atlanta and then Dallas. Never mind.
But anyway, I think I think just like what you were arguing with the DBs, I think it could be the same kind of a scenario here where we suddenly feel a lot better just because whoever the hell is out there knows what they're supposed to do and does it. Violence.
Well, and you know, he should be well rested because he will be the only guy on this coaching staff that's done evaluating his players because he doesn't have any more players to evaluate. So he's kicked back on the beach someplace, you know, drinking a pina colada, while the rest of the guys are going through film.
Call me when we sign somebody.
Not a lot of agonizing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, there's nothing to watch.
There's no fat to be trimmed off of that bone.
no.
Anyway, I like Ken Norton Jr. I think that's going to be
I do too.
Yeah, it's one of the exciting hires here.
The last one that we were going to talk about was mine, Daryl Tapp, defensive line coach. I was excited to see his name. He was born locally in Chesapeake, Virginia, grew up a Redskins fan, so he's been a Redskins fan his whole life. Went to Virginia Tech, where he was a 2-time first team all conference in 04 and 05 as a defensive end / linebacker. And in 2018, he was actually inducted into the Virginia Tech Hall of Fame. So, cool little nugget.
Nobody's perfect.
Exactly.
Somewhere Mark is throwing darts at you, John.
He was drafted in the 2nd round, 63rd overall by the Seattle Seahawks, where he played from 06 to 09. He actually predated Pete Carroll. I looked to see if he overlapped into the Legion of Boom defense, and he was not a part of that. He actually was there when Holmgren was the head coach. Then he moved on to the Eagles, played there for 2 years, played on the Redskins for 1 season in 2013. Then he went to Detroit for a couple years, New Orleans a couple years, and Tampa Bay for a couple years. So he had an 11-year pro career as a player, and it crossed over 6 different teams. As a coach, jumped into coaching the year after he left the Bucks in 2018 as a quality control coach at Central Michigan, went to Vanderbilt, ended up becoming a co-D-line coach at Virginia Tech. In 2020, the following year in 21, he was signed by the San Francisco 49ers to be the assistant defensive line coach, where he actually was the assistant D-line coach until this past offseason. Studying under a guy by the name of Chris Kosurik, I think is how his name is, who's been the D-line coach for 5 years. Since 2019. Just a little nugget on him. Greg Cosell says he's one of the best. Kosurik's one of the best D-line coaches in the NFL. When you have a guy like Nick Bosa on your D-line, chances are you are not going to lose your job. So I don't think Daryl Tapp was going anywhere further within that organization. But he was also studying under the tutelage of that guy. So and he was actually interviewed before the Super Bowl, literally asking him how he was going to relate to Chase Young. And apparently the two of them bonded a little bit. And they didn't directly identify Daryl Taps and Kersurik as the difference makers, but the Tap hinted that Chase Young is the kind of guy that needs to trust you. And when you can relate to that guy, then you see a different gear. So I'm wondering if that's a little bit of his coaching style and Kersurik's that got what we saw out of Chase Young in the Super Bowl, which was more than we have seen out of Chase Young in 2.5 years. So, I was excited about Tap, and because I am extremely excited about seeing what some fresh eyes can do with this D line, which is where we have invested the most financially and draft capital over the last 5 seasons, and it has been underwhelming, to say the least.
And not just who he worked under as a position coach, but he's got a year under D'Amico Ryans as a defensive coordinator, and then a year under Steve Wilkes as a defensive coordinator. That doesn't hurt anything either.
Mm-hmm.
So to wrap up, I wanted to just mention 2 quick things before we sign off. The first was, I've heard this a lot. I don't know if you guys have honed in on it, but I've heard a number of like the coordinators and the head coach talk about how they didn't want to hire guys all from the same tree, all with the same, kind of like what we saw with Rivera, where we were we were the North, we were the North Washington Panthers coaching staff. They hired guys with like incredible diversity in terms of a lot of connections, but a lot of diversity in terms of what they've been doing, with the idea being that, look, we're going to take the best ideas from all these different schemes, and make the best possible offense and defense and special teams that we can. So I'm excited about that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was Chris did some homework, and so I wanted to share it because we talked a lot tonight about how much experience is on this coaching staff. I mean, it's incredible. I bet you there's not, if you added up all the years of experience, there's probably not, if any, other NFL teams that have as much coaching time at the NFL level as the guys that we brought in. But Chris discovered something surprising.
966 years. To be exact.
Wow.
But that includes everybody on the list. I just did a quick summary this morning of the differences in age, average age, between Rivera's staff and Quinn's staff. And the only positions that I used were the head coaches, the coordinators, and the primary position coaches. I didn't include any quality control coaches or assistant special education coaches or assistant position coaches or any of that. So just the top, the cream of the cream positions. Under Ron Rivera, the average coaching age was 51 years old. Under Dan Quinn, it's 46 years old. So there's 5 years younger on average at the highest level coaching positions on the team. And I think that's significant.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing.
I also think I saw a stat that combined there's like 22 or 23 Super Bowl rings between players and coaches, as players and coaches within this coaching staff. Like,
and to be blunt, Derek, we hired people that come from organizations that know what the fuck they're doing.
yes.
I mean, and even Detroit in recent years, they've shown that they know what they're doing. And so I think that's another big thread throughout all these coaches, is they're coming from places where it's not a goat
dumpster fire.
Right. It's
we're not trying to recreate a losing team and run it back.
Quick around the horn, how would you rate it on an A to F scale, the coaching staff? I mean, based on what we know.
I'm gonna say B, just because of the concerns with the O-line coach. But honestly, that means nothing at this point.
A-.
I'm giving them an A-.
B+.
All right. Not showing off, not dropping out. Right in the meat of the curve.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm excited. and I feel good about it. But I also Bobby Johnson was a head scratcher for me. Truly. Honestly, Donatel was a little bit of a head scratcher. It's not like the San Diego secondary played, great guns the last couple of years. And there's an all pro playing safety there. So, I don't know, but I feel really good about the top to bottom. I feel really good about this staff.
So those who suffered through our position coach overview, this will be the last time we do something like this, because we're getting ready to dive into what they call it free agency. I think free agency and the draft is coming hot and heavy. So if you are a regular listener, tune in, because we're going to be talking. We have a really great record of picking free agents and draft guys that the team ought to draft. So,
Combine is like next week,
yeah, it's crazy.
the 26th.
And the legal tampering
13th.
period starts on the 13th. I thought it was the 11th.
I thought it was the 11th too.
Yeah, I think it's the 11th.
It might be the 11th. You're right.
I think
You
it's
know
the
what?
11th through the 13th.
I think you're right. I think
you
league
can actually sign guys on the 14th. I think
sounds right. Yeah.
It's the legal tampering period, as opposed to the illegal tampering period.
And please, if you know someone in the NFL, tell them, don't go to the bathroom on the sideline. It's just not good. It's so 1990s.
And if they do,
All right,
we'll see to they get a game ball.
That's right. All right, boys.
Good job, guys.